But it was at the pavilion down at Hamid bin Rashid Boulevard, and it was so exciting and so interesting, and he really sparked up our interest towards science, so we're happy to have him back again. Amin Tejpar is an advocate for science, for history, for Islamic civilization, and today he's talking to us about one of the most important scholars, Hasan Ibn Al Haitham. So without further ado, Amin, if you'd like to start.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Maria. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming on a Saturday. I know it's really tough with the beautiful weather that we have out there, but thank you very much, and it's great to see all of you here. Many of you I know, and some of you I don't, so it's very nice to meet you. I hope we continue this series, so a big thanks to Arwa for starting the series, for launching the series. It's fantastic. I know you've already had one presentation last month. You're going to be doing it every month. That's okay. So that's really brilliant. Today we're talking about a figure that I've admired for a long time, almost 20 years. I've really every time I come to his books, it's a new experience, and every time I read about him, it's a different angle. It's just a rich source of inspiration, and it's an intellectual journey as well, and I hope to share that passion with you and get you involved in some of the experiments as well. So feel free, if you feel like you want to come a little closer to see some of these things, please feel free. There are a couple of experiments that I have to do because of the lasers involved, and they're a little bit dangerous. I had to actually get a couple on the black market. They're no longer available, so they're very difficult to get, some of these lasers. But we have them today, and I want to use them as safely as possible. So when I ask you to turn off and to close your eyes, please do so. Just in case there's a reflection, and I will block it as much as I can. I also have my glasses on. There's just one or two points where I will ask you to do that, if you don't mind, just for everyone's safety. It's not going to blind anybody. I'm very careful with it, and it's not going to hurt anybody. I just want to be absolutely sure that these lasers are, I'm using them safely, and also because there are children here, I don't want them to also use these lasers at home. So this is not a do it at home experiment, but some of the ones are, and I will tell you which ones are obviously safe, and please feel free to do them, engage your families with them, and they are fascinating experiments. You know, optics, light is a field of study that has fascinated human beings for thousands of years. So I begin with just a little bit of a disclaimer. Of course, I knew I would lose my pointer at this point after all the preparation. Oh yeah, sure. So today we're talking about light and vision, and at some points I will be turning off the lights, and it will get quite dark in here, so just in case you need to, if you need me to turn it on again, please do let me know, and I will turn it on again, because I'd like you to be able to exit safely if you do need to do that at some point, because when I do the experiments, it does have to be pitch black in here. So do feel free to tell me to turn on the lights if you need me to do that. Okay, so we're going to start with light and vision, and a disclaimer, because I don't want to approach this in a linguistic way, so I don't want you thinking I speak absolutely fluent Arabic. My access to Ibn Al Haitham has always been through the European text. So English translations, French translations, I sort of kind of get through it with a good dictionary. I'm struggling with the Latin, and I'm struggling with the Greek. So all of those are my access to Ibn Al Haitham. Arabic is not my native language, but I love the language. It is a beautiful language. It is one of the world's most beautiful languages, I think. And I rely on dear friends like Najwa and Ahmed, who is in Damascus right now, to get the feel for the words, to get the root of the words, which I hope you will also enjoy as we read these words. It's been about 20 years of research in this, looking at global evolution of science. My interest is the global evolution of science. Science is not the prerogative of any one culture, is my argument. It has begun in many places all over the world, and it has melted many times. It has come together in places like Dubai. We've had cities like Dubai in the past, cosmopolitan cities, multicultural cities, that have brought together all these ideas and fused them to produce something new. And this has happened many times in global civilization. my personal interest is at the intersection of science, culture, spirituality, and art. Whenever I talk about science, it's never just science. Even when I'm teaching science at the university, I try not to teach it as science, the traditional way of teaching science, because that's the most boring way you can teach science. Absolutely the most boring. Science has to be taught embedded within culture. It has to be taught how it functions in society, the arguments that scientists have. Scientists are human beings. The arguments, the battles, the vicious battles sometimes that they go through to carve out a certain idea, to give it a name, and then to make sure that that name survives, you know, because that's all it is at the end of the day. It's the loudest voice, the most intelligent voice, or whatever you want to say, that will prevail, you know. And culture plays a big role. So my current studies is in looking at how science and culture come together, and particularly how they might intersect with spirituality and also art, which I love and admire. Islamic art is one of my passions, and so I'll try and bring it in as much as I can. And the other thing I'd like to say is that the story of Ibn Al Haitham shows us some very interesting parallels between Islam and the West. So right now we live in an age when these two cultures are seen as antithetical. They're not seen as compatible. And this history of Ibn Al Haitham shows us that they've been on parallel journeys for almost 1,000 years. Yeah? And there's a common heritage between Islam and the West. We draw from the same books many, many times. So the books that I sent out, the Aristotle's books, is the same fountain that we've all drunk from. Whether you come from Europe, you come from the Middle East, even as far east as India. We have all dipped into these books over the past 1,000 years. Our scholars, our thinkers have all drunk from that same pool and been inspired by those ideas and taken it in different directions. Yeah, so I hope you got a little glimpse of those Aristotle's, the Aristotelian books there. Ibn Al Haitham, for me, is on par, undoubtedly, whether by IQ or creativity, is on par with Newton and Einstein. And yet he's hardly heard of. People barely talk about him. So why is that? When I was a kid, when I was about 12, 13, 14, and this really bothered me, history of science was taught like this. You started off with Greek science, then nothing, and then European science in the 16th century, right? And science then became, Europe then became the birthplace of science. For decades, that's what I was taught to believe. My professors taught me that. Right up until university, I was taught this. I was never given this. I was never told what happened here. So I struggled a little bit from the age of 16 onwards to figure out what happened in these 2,000 years. And of course, it's all written about, but it's just not taught, right? So for the longest time, Arabic science was kept as a bracket, you know, barely there. Just barely there. If it's needed, then it was only needed to transmit the excellent knowledge of the Greeks to the excellent knowledge of Europe. Then it was just a conduit, just a pipeline, right? From one point to the other. It took about till 1970s when the whole of academia went through our self-reflection. You know, why are we doing this? Why are we being so Eurocentric? And in every department in the world, in the major universities, started questioning why is the curriculum so Eurocentric. And it started in the 1970s. And what happened was the veil was slightly lifted, slightly. And Arabic science kind of came into its place. People started appreciating Arabic science a little bit and saying, oh, maybe it does have a role in the history of science. Yeah? But we still have enormous gaps in our understanding of what happened here. Yeah. Now, Hasan Ibn Al Haitham al-Basri al-Masri, because he is from Basra, and he eventually moved to Egypt, which is why he gets this wonderful name. Born in 965, died in 1040, lived a pretty good life, and he worked right till the end. He was publishing right till the end. Works on science and mathematics and astronomy and light, particularly light, optics. Yeah. Now, what he does for me is he brings all three heritages together. He brings for me the Greek, the Arabic, and the European in really spectacular ways, in really luminous ways. And I hope I can share that passion with you today. Yeah? Now, I love asking questions like this. Why in the 17th century is somebody publishing a book dedicated to a Polish prince with Ibn Al Haitham on the cover? Right, not on the cover, sorry, on the frontispiece, which is the second page after the title. Yeah, so you've got the title, and then you would come to this. And right next to him, I don't know if you can see down there, back there, that's Galileo, one of the giants of European science. He has just passed away, I believe, when this book came out, yep. And has left behind an incredible legacy in science. And everybody's like, wow, that man was something, Galileo. But so was Ibn Al Haytham, so let's put him on a pedestal as well. This is 17th century. The book is then presented to a prince, a Polish prince, and the question is, why would you put Ibn Al Haytham on there so late into the Renaissance? The Renaissance has already started. There's no need to look back. Why put Ibn Al Haytham on there? Any thoughts? Now remember, Ibn Al Haytham lived 1,000 years before this, almost 1,000 years before this, 700 years before this, and he lived in Egypt. He was born in Baghdad, moved to Basra, moved to Damascus. I think he may have even lived in Damascus at one point, moved to Cairo, and it's believed that he died in Cairo. But why 600 years ago? What's the importance of this man, and why put him on a pedestal like this? On a book that was presented to a prince. So I saw a couple of hands go up, so we'll go in the back there.
So, can you hear?
Yes, I can. Can everybody hear? Okay.
So I believe that's kind of a statement that we have to start with they ended. We have to start what they ended.
Okay, interesting. So it's a continuity. Let's continue what they have started. Yes, very good point. That's a really good point. Hank, go ahead.
Following on what was said, it's a book on the moon. So he basically has done a lot of studies on the moon. So he started.
I started recording.
Yeah, both excellent points. Yes. Sorry, you were saying? You wanted to add something? Hani?
No.
No? Okay. So absolutely interesting points, both of them. That this represents a continuity. That what we're about to do is a continuation of what Ibn Al Haytham started. And he studied the moon, absolutely. He was one of the first people to study it scientifically. So why not name this book on the moon, or at least have him honor him here. So there he is, a close-up. Now, I have a different reason, but which I can get into later, but I don't want to get into it now, because I think those two answers that you guys gave us are pretty good starting points for that. And I can get into this a little bit more later if anybody's interested in why I think these guys are on the cover of a book given to a Polish prince. Somebody called him the most important, or his ideas, the most important idea of the last millennium. New York Times, Richard Powers wrote an article in 1999 saying his was the most important idea of the last 1,000 years. Wow, and we haven't even heard of him. That was the whole point of the article, that we haven't even heard of this man. This was pre-9/11. You don't get articles like this anymore. Forget that, those days are gone. Even the Arabic departments have all kind of crumbled since then, partly because of academic politics as a result of cultural politics. Again, you don't hear too many people saying that anymore, and we will look at the end, by the end of this presentation, hopefully you'll see why his is the most important idea. I would argue yes. So let's see if it makes sense. Yeah. Keep your eyes out for Ibn Al Haytham in Dubai, because he is around, and he pops up in strange places like Bastakia. There is a studio named after him, Ibn Al Haytham, Center for Visual Arts. You might be familiar with it. Otherwise, you might know about it from Dubai culture. So now here's Ibn Al Haytham. In his youth, he's 16, he's probably 14, 15, 16, he's a teenager. And he's living in Basra, and he becomes fascinated by mathematics, physics, and astronomy. And he starts reading the books that I passed around, the Aristotle books, the little books. He starts reading these. and he understands them inside out. He has internalized it completely. And what he realizes is that that's his love and passion. And when he grows up, he wants to be a scientist, but he has to work as a civil servant, doing very, very tedious work. And at one point it's thought that in his 20s he feigns madness. He says, I've gone mad, so I can't work anymore. So according to his biographers, he actually feigns madness. I can totally sympathize with that. And I think we've all been there. But his passion is looking at mathematical equations, equations hadn't quite formed then. And so when I say equations, I should be careful. They're not equations the way we think of them today. It took a while, it took 500 years after Ibn Al Haitham to actually get mathematics into these forms that we call equations today. But he was very fascinated by mathematics, physics, and astronomy. So that was his love. He feigned madness to avoid work. And now I'd like to sort of shift your attention to the mystery of light a little bit. So let's take a break from Ibn Al Haitham, and I'm going to now close. Hi, come on in. So light is a very, very, very still mysterious thing. Remember, it has a dual nature. It's a particle. It's a wave. It's still an enigma. It's still, we take it for granted because it's all around us, but it's still an enigma, and it's not understood as well as we think. Now, I want to show you something. One of my favorite. I hope you can hear me. I'm going to have to sort of hold it here, so I don't have a mic that. And here, I'm going to do this. Okay, can everybody see? Wrong question to ask when you're in a pitch dark room. Okay, so. Okay, is my laser? Some of you who are in the front can see, but so don't say anything. But I want the people in the back to answer whether my laser is on or off. Off? Off or on? Off or on? Off? Off or on? Sounds like an ophthalmologist, doesn't it? Is that right? Is that off or on? Okay. So the light's been on all along. That's because light is invisible. You cannot see light. Human beings cannot see light. It's one of the most mysterious elements of light. And it's breathtaking when you think about it, because we rely on light to see. So what's going on? Why can't we see light? Any young ones here who want to answer? Where are they? The kids. All right. So I can barely see you because I've got a light right against me, but I'm going to move here. Yeah, I can see you guys a little better now. Any thoughts on why light is invisible?
Speed of light.
Speed of light. Okay, very good. It's going too fast for the human eye. It's actually, I haven't thought of it that way. That's actually very interesting. What else do you think is going on?
It needs something to bounce off of.
It needs something to bounce. It needs matter. Light always needs matter. Very good. So it needs matter before you can see it. So light, which is invisible, has to touch matter before you see it. It must touch matter. So there it is. Does everybody see it? And I'm just spraying water, which now gives the light the matter it needs for it to become suddenly visible to the human eye. It's really breathtaking when you see that. And it is one of the most amazing relationships in nature, that electromagnetic radiation is entirely invisible to the human eye, except when it touches something physical. And that metaphor becomes very, very, very beautiful in Islamic mysticism, because then light, God's light, also has to touch something in order for God to become visible. You know, so it's just an extraordinary metaphor there. Really, really extraordinary metaphor. Right? And the Muslim mystics take that idea and they run with it in different directions. The scientists are also fascinated by this. Ibn Al Haitham is also fascinated by it, although he doesn't explicitly try to figure out why. He tries obliquely, yeah, to figure out why this is happening. So that was my mystery of light demonstration. Let's go back to Ibn Al Haitham. Now remember, he's a young man in Basra, really bored with his job, feigning madness, and RFP comes up. We're all familiar with RFPs, work in procurement. That's all I hear about these days. He gets an RFP. There's an RFP received at the court of the Buyid dynasty, for whom he used to work. And I have no idea what he used to do, but he used to do the most tedious accounting you can imagine. Okay, that's what Ibn Al Haitham used to do. Because no one recognized his genius. Obviously, he hadn't done anything yet to prove his genius. He just knew that he loved mathematics, physics, and astronomy. There's an RFP from Egypt, from the king of Egypt, by the name of Hakim. Yes, I'll just call him Hakim for now. Oh, an RFP, request for proposal. For those of you who are not in procurement, it's a request for proposal, which companies send out to get projects. So you can then bid for the project. If you're a consultant, you can then bid for a project. So I'm just calling it an RFP. They didn't used to call it an RFP. It came on a royal document, and it came to the Buyid court, and it said, "We're looking for an engineer who can help us fix the problem of the Nile. The Nile floods every year, causes a lot of damage. We don't know how to control the water. We need to build a dam. Send us your best engineer." So the Buyid dynasty says, okay, who wants to do this job because we can make a lot of money? Ibn Al Haitham raises his hands, and off he goes to Egypt at the tender age of 35. He's 35 now, imagine that. Okay, wow. And he goes to Egypt. And he finds the perfect spot for the dam after almost a year of hunting. He goes along the Nile searching for it, and he says Aswan would be the best place, which is now currently the location of the dam in Egypt. If you go to Aswan, there is a dam there. That dam didn't happen until 1950. The plans for the dam could not be manifested till 1950s. But Ibn Al Haitham said if there's a spot, the best spot would be here. And but here's the thing: if the pharaohs could have done it, they would have done it. I've decided that it's impossible given our current technology. And he goes to the Caliph Hakim, who had sponsored his trip, and he says, look, I can't do this. And there are two stories. One is that the king says, no worries, you're a bright man, go copy texts of Euclid. And the second story is he was imprisoned until the death of the Caliph. In house arrest. He was under house arrest, forced to teach at the Al-Azhar University. And that's where he taught many, many students. So pick one story. I like the imprisonment story, it's kind of cute, but I don't think it's true. Because what he does in those next 10 years is pretty remarkable. It changes the trajectory of science, basically. So I find it hard to believe that he would have been under house arrest. I think the former was the case, that go ahead, do your work, translate Euclid. We need lots of texts, Euclid, Aristotle, Plato, go ahead and translate it. We'll give you 150 dinars a year. I think that was his salary. That was his salary. I didn't put his salary down. Annual 150 dinars, which I don't know what the value today would have been. And the poor man starts translating these texts that I sent around. And that's his job. But at night, he's doing very, very interesting experiments that change the history of science. Now, just a quick note that Haytham was born in a time when several civilizations merged within the Muslim community, within the Muslim oikumen. Marshall Hodgson Marshall Hodgson is one of the great historians from University of Chicago, wrote this wonderful book called Rethinking World History. And he says, don't think of the Middle East as just the Middle East isolated. It's an Afro-Eurasian oikumen, which brings all these cultures together. And as a result of that, all these great ideas poured into the Middle East, into the Muslim civilization. So it wasn't just Muslims working there. There were Christians, there were Jews, there were Greeks, there were pagans, there were Sabaeans, there were people who, every faith you can imagine, Buddhists, Hindus, all doing science under the patronage of Muslim caliphs. One patron would be Hakim, Hakim the Umbrella in the Fatimid period, who was the patron of Ibn Al Haitham. Now, there's a story that the women of the court, of Hakim's court, were some of the richest in the world. One of them, the sister of the caliph, really loved science. And it's very, very possible that she was the true patron of Ibn Al Haitham, that she actually funded the research that he needed to do. There is a possibility that that's the case. I haven't been able to figure it out yet. Yeah? But if you look at Islamic civilization at the time of Ibn Al Haitham, you see that you have a whole bunch of civilizations that have come together, merged, especially in a place like Egypt. You've got the Greek civilization, you've got the Hellenistic, the Byzantine, the Indian, the Sasanian, and the Arabic, all coming together to create a very cosmopolitan city, Cairo. But also Baghdad, before that, was also a very cosmopolitan city. In fact, the Bayt al-Hikmah was opened by Caliph Mamun to translate all the world's greatest texts into Arabic. That was just 150 years before Haytham. So Haytham now is heir to all of this. He's able to access the science of all of these civilizations. And they all pour into what we now call Arabic Islamic science. So this is the real picture of science and the way it travels. Yeah? Now, this translation, as I say here, the translation is the most understated event in history, I would say. People have not appreciated the importance of this translation movement. It was one of the most critical translation movements in the world, because it completely and radically changes the way science flows. Yeah? So, Haytham, on a typical day, in a typical library in Cairo, would have had access to all of this. And he would have sat there and studied this inside out. Yeah? All of these names would have been familiar to him. All of their texts would have been familiar to him. One of his favorites was Apollonius, who studied conics, the shapes of cones, the mathematics of cones. Yeah, and he became a master at it. He actually then became even better than Apollonius. By the time he was 50 or 60, he was a master of conics, and he wrote several works on conics. You know? But also he's surrounded by light in Islamic spirituality. The concept of light in Islamic spirituality, the ayah Nur, which we're all familiar with, where Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. And God is compared as a metaphor, a niche, a mishkat, where there is a lamp. And the lamp is inside a glass. And the glass is like a shining star. And the verse continues, taking the metaphor of light and pushing it deeper and deeper and deeper, light upon light. There are layers and layers of light before you can actually come in communication with God. God is just spheres of light, luminous light, pouring forth. And remember, you need matter before it becomes visible. Otherwise, where is God? We cannot see him with the eyes. He's invisible to the human eye. Now, a lot of people feel like we can study things like this, how they used to make these beautiful vases. This is the mosque lamp, this is the masjid lamp, this is the lamp used in the masjid. But there was a struggle to give it this clarity, this luminosity. And that can only come from a cultural understanding of light. So when we don't study light and the mechanics of light and the context of light before we study this art, we've kind of lost a big chunk of our appreciation for how and why they would have made something like this and hung it in a masjid. You know, brilliantly. Because when you see the shining in a masjid, it must have been absolutely stunning. And imagine hundreds of these now inside a masjid. And it would have looked absolutely stunning. This is sort of the Islamic version of the Gothic windows, the stained glass windows that emerged in France for the first time. Because again, it's a celebration of light. You know? You can just make it a little bit softer. It's kind of nice to have it in the background while I talk about this. Again, another disclaimer, I'm not a theologian, so I don't want to get into the theological side of this. This is a subject matter that I feel theologians can approach, philosophers can approach, artists can approach, designers can approach, looking at how the luminous light is represented in Islam. What is this luminous light? That the divine is the source of this light. Light is embodied in all the scriptures. In the Revelation, the Quran mentions the Quran itself as a source of light, the Gospel as a source of light, the Torah as the source of light. Light is salvation, it's guidance. You know, there are many, many verses in the Quran that link light to guidance. In the form of lightning, in the form of the sun, in the form of the moon. Light is everywhere. Light is manifested in the cosmos. Sun is a blazing light. The moon is a reflective light. The words used for blazing light and reflective light are quite distinctly different. One is a burning lamp. One is a softer, reflected light. There's so many forms of light in the Quran. And light is the subject of many spiritual treatises across the Muslim world. The most famous is Ghazali's Mishkat al-Anwar, which is a beautiful masterpiece of light in Islamic spirituality. It's a gorgeous book. I just started reading it. I'm sad that I hadn't read it all these years. It's a fantastic journey into the mystical dimensions of light. And he explains the surah Ayat al-Nur in ways that I've never actually ever read being described. It's quite beautiful. So if you are into this idea of luminosity in the spiritual dimension of Islam, this is a good place to start. Ghazali's Mishkat al-Anwar. So as I say, the luminous in Islamic culture is everywhere. And it requires now really modern analytical tools for us to decide why Muslims were doing and writing and thinking in the ways they were about light. And also what's interesting is that the word light has an incredible semantic field in Islamic civilization. So we've all heard of Inuits having like 50 words for snow. Well, the Muslim civilization has at least, just in what I've looked at least 15 different ways to describe light. Each light having a different property, a different sensation, a different effect on the human soul, a different effect on the human mind, which is really worth, again, discovering as moderns. Because I think we've disconnected ourselves from light a bit, from this notion of light, and from natural light particularly. How many of us actually wake up early in the morning to look at Venus, or wake up super early to see a planetary conjunction, you know, when it approaches the moon and you actually watch the star approaching the moon, or the northern lights, or, you know. So as I said, Ibn Al Haitham was influenced by one of the greatest Greeks who ever lived, and I've sent 4 of his books around, Aristotle. Aristotle teaches Ibn Al Haitham that you can learn about the world through the senses, through your 5 senses. You don't need anything more than your 5 senses and a good brain to learn about the world. But what wasn't clear, he uses the word can you read that for me? I'm stuck here. Tajriba, that's right. Okay, because I always mix up the Tajriba. In Arabic, it was translated as Tajriba. In Greek, it's empiria, which where we get the word empirical, or empiricism, which is to use your senses to look at the world. It's kind of an inductive process. That Tajriba is the word that was often translated for empiria. Aristotle's Empiria became Tajriba in Islam. They don't mean the same thing though. There's already a distinction being made by Muslim translators. As the Muslims are translating Aristotle, they're saying, hang on a second. We need to sharpen this word a little. We need to give it a sense of tajriba, which now today means experimentation. Is it the kind of experimentation you would do in a lab today? Or it's not?
It's also for tajriba also applies to your life experience.
Life experience, yes. So then in that sense, it is closer to empiria. The word that he likes to use, Ibn Al Haitham replaces this completely. He says, no, no, no. This is the new term now. This is the fashion. This is how science is going to progress. It's through itibar. Itibar. Did I say it correctly? Okay. We're going to look at what itibar means. He formulates the idea that this word means controlled experiments by varying single parameters at a time. Yeah? Now, for those of you who are in the science, that'll make sense. That you'll be like, that's how experiments are worked. That's how experiments function, right? But it took him almost 30 years to carve out, to tease out this understanding of experimentation. Yeah? So he replaces Aristotle's experience, that you can know the world through experience, to you can know the world only through controlled experiments. A major shift in thinking, major, dramatic shift in how that Aristotelian concept is understood. Yeah? And as a result of that, oh yeah, there's the 150 dinars. He's now working under house arrest. Sorry, that slide. And again, he feigns madness, by the way. So the story has him feigning madness twice. A lot of his biographers say that he feigned madness one more time to escape the prison. But then he creates the masterpiece of science, which is called the Kitab al-Manadir. Yeah, that is his masterpiece. And within it, he uses the technique of controlled experimentation in a way that was never done before. Now, I would argue that he is, in that sense, the first to use this methodology so efficiently to come up with an answer that had puzzled people for 2,000 years. The human vision. How do people see? He uses this particular method of controlled experiments to figure out how human beings see. Yeah? Human vision was a complete enigma. For thousands of years, people didn't understand how it worked. Now, let me first do another experiment of the mystery of light, because I like these little mystery of light experiments, before we jump into that. So 1 second. I'm going to turn off the lights again. Does anybody need to go out for any reason? Because now it's going to be pitch black again. If I can just use the light of the projector for a little while. Okay. So first, I just want you to appreciate that light gives birth to colors. Without light, and everything I'm now demonstrating moving forward is in the book Kitab al-Manadir, Ibn Al Haitham, thinking it through, working out in very, very interesting ways. It's almost like a meditation in science, just like the discourse of Descartes, where he doubts, he starts with a doubt, he doubts everything, and he starts from the ground. That's Ibn Al Haitham. He starts right from the scratch. He's like, look, this business of human vision has been too much of a mess, and it's time to now fix it. It's time to understand how human beings see everything around them. Yeah? Now, without light, there's no color. If I turn off, obviously, if I turn off this, there really is no color, right? Only when I turn on the light do you see color. Only when I turn on the light do you see the flowers in their spectacular beauty. Again, you only see yellow, white, and purple when I shine light on them. Yeah, as soon as I take away the light, the purple actually turns black. it just becomes some meaningless color. Yeah, and the yellow has now turned some indescribable color. The white maintains its whiteness a little bit because it's picking up the faint light over there. All things need light in order to generate color, and that's something that really bothered Ibn Al Haitham quite a bit. But here's something quite remarkable. Light flows very easily through clear glass, through clear water of any color. But if I take white light and I push it through green, it's now become green. Now those of you who are physicists are saying, well, of course now we know why this happens. And of course it took almost 600 years to figure out why this happens, but that's why we know now how it happens. But those who are artists and those who are like me, a little bit mystical, I still find this fascinating. That light, I can push white light through something like green water and it becomes green light on the other side. Right? May seem obvious, but it's not. It's not that obvious. It requires a lot of mathematical, physical, and philosophical understanding to figure out why this happens. Yeah, and we're still mesmerized by these things. Now watch what happens when I take a red laser. So there's the red laser. What will happen when I pass it through clear water? Take a guess.
Shine through.
It will shine through. Okay, it does. What happens when I pass it through red light? Through red water?
Shine through.
Okay. Red water shines through. Blue water? This is green. This is yellow. Okay, let's try yellow. Goes through, but it still stays red. Notice that the color of the laser hasn't changed. The color of white light changes. White light becomes yellow, but the laser stays red. It's not affected by the color at all. It still stays red. Whether I pass it through red, or I pass it through green, or I pass it through blue. Now I'm going to try blue. Ooh. Blue stops it completely in its tracks. No way I'm going to be able to get through the blue with the red laser. Yet, white light has no problems getting through. Right? Now I could do the same thing with the green laser, but it's a bit risky, so I will not do it. If I can just, I'll just shine it here. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Don't want it to bounce off anything. Can you see the beam?
Yeah.
Okay, so if I were to make it brighter, I'm not gonna, yeah, it's really super bright. This is about 10 times brighter than your typical laser pointer. Okay, that's about as much as I'm going to show. I don't want to spoil anyone's eyes. If I took green laser and I shone it through all these colors, it would have a different pattern. It would go through certain colors and not go through certain colors. Sorry, I know this is very bright. Okay, so where is this thing? Jim Al-Khalili recently did a BBC series, and he said at the moment where he talks about the masterpiece of science, Kitab al-Manazir, he says this is a manual for future generations. He says this is the moment science is summoned into existence. He says it in the really nice British BBC way that I can't do, but then your jaw just drops and you're like, wow, that's really cool. And for me, it's one of the earliest mathematical approach to light, and it is probably, without doubt, the first mathematical exploration of light, the phenomenon of light. He gives birth to the science of optics, which we cannot live without today. Everything is optics today. Yeah. So, what were the main components of the Greek theories? I'll tell you because it's quite funny. There were two competing theories, the extromission and the intromission. Extromission said, when I look at something, it's like Superman. I send out rays from my liver. The liver generates these incredible rays, goes through my body, and it shoots out through my eyes, and I scan everything very quickly, at milliseconds, and I know who's in the room, and I know that I'm in a theater. By the way, Ibn Al Haitham would have been delighted that we're in a theater, and you'll see in a minute why. But that theory was powerful, and it meant a lot to people, because it even had a very spiritual metaphor around it, particularly in the Christian tradition, where if you looked at an icon with your eyes, you actually could touch the icon. You could touch the Spirit of God with your eyes. If you looked at Christ, you could feel His Spirit, in a sense. So in Christian mysticism, it became very, very important to be able to send out these rays. Now, these rays are invisible, by the way, so they're never seen. You never see it quite like this. This is just Superman. There was another theory which is really quite cute. And I need my little thingies, the sheets that Dina drew on the table. Okay. So Dina here drew these beautiful sunflowers for me. The second theory says, no, there's nothing coming out of your eyes. It's the object that actually sends bits and pieces of itself. This is, by the way, a beautiful sunflower. You can see. Let me show you this. If you can see it here. Can you see it? There's your sunflower. Sorry, I don't know if it's working for you guys. But layers of the sunflowers travel to you, one after the other. Thousands and thousands of layers. The sunflower gives itself to you. If I can just pull out this silly little thing here. There we go. So we've got one layer coming out, hitting your eye. Second layer hits your eye. After about 20, 30 of these, you start saying, oh, that's a sunflower. Okay, so that was the second theory. Because nobody could explain this otherwise. How else could you explain how we see a sunflower, right? And that was called the Edola theory, which is the intromission theory. Yeah? So extromission, your eyes go out to the object. Your eyes send out rays to the objects. And the intromission, the object sends layers of itself to you. Both have problems, right? Because if this is giving you layers upon layers upon layers, eventually there's not going to be a sunflower left. Because how many layers can it possibly produce and send you? So all of these things became huge issues. And what he starts doing are these experimental demonstrations, Ibn Al Haitham. Piece by piece, he starts breaking down the properties of sight, ultimately coming, I've already done the laser experiments, I won't do it here, ultimately getting to the point where he now says, light bounces off the object, comes to your eye. Picks up the color with it, comes to your eye. And that is a brand new theory of vision. This is when Jim Al-Khalili says, and science was summoned at this point in time. The science of optics is now summoned at this point in time. Yeah, and that science of optics, we still believe in. We have not changed this theory of light or sight in 1,000 years. It's still the Ibn Al Haytham's theory of light, and still the Ibn Al Haytham's theory of sight. We have not broken that paradigm since then. Now, we've added details to it, lots and lots of details to it, but we've not changed the paradigm, which is light bounces off the object, sends information to the eye, then the brain interprets it. The brain finally interprets it as a plant. Yeah? And today we know that that interpretation happens at the back of the brain. So this is the vision, believe it or not. It happens here in the darkness of the back of the brain, is where you actually begin to see. And the brain then tells you that this is a flower, this is a sunflower. Yeah? Now children cannot do that. Why can't children know that this is a sunflower? Suppose a newborn baby, and you show them a sunflower. Are they going to see a sunflower? What do they see? Do they just see flashes of orange? Do they just see flashes of orange as you try and say, this is a sunflower, little baby? So you have to first obviously teach it that when you see a pattern like this, the brain then has to know that that pattern is a sunflower. It has to take information from here. Oops. Let me go back to that. It has to take information from here, mix it with information from here that you've just taught it, and then eventually recognize that this is a sunflower, and then connect a word to it, sunflower. It's an enormous process for the human brain, but the human brain does it so effortlessly that even babies do it every single day of their lives. Children do it. We're still trying to teach computers to do this. Very, very difficult, but children do it effortlessly. But this raises enormous questions about the role of the brain, pedagogy, sight, all of that. So then there's a whole line of thinking that Ibn Al Haitham opens up in that area as well, in the brain, the psychology area, the psychology of visual rays. He believed that light moved very, very quickly, but that it had a finite speed. He absolutely was a firm believer in that. He thought light were particles that bounced off like a ball. Like if I threw a ball on a wall, it would bounce. Well, that's exactly how he thought the light bounces off things. It bounces off like a tennis ball. Yeah? He thought they were all particles. And he says light from any source. Now here's another breakthrough. Light from any source is light. It's still going to function the way I've described it in this book, no matter what the source of light. That is a huge breakthrough in science again. Nobody had created such a universal law before that could apply anywhere in the universe. So he's got this universal law that light will behave like light no matter where you are, and no matter where it comes from. So another major breakthrough. Yeah. Now I'm going to show you something that's quite beautiful. Not many of us get to see it, and Ibn Al Haitham certainly didn't see it. I'm talking into my laser. I'll let you enjoy it first. So this is a kind of, I think there's 2 tracks playing somewhere. There's a couple of tracks. Is it also playing here? It might be playing from here as well. Okay, we'll move it on. So this is a kind of light that Ibn Al Haitham would not have seen. There's no way he would have been able to see the northern lights. You have to be quite far north. Even when you live quite far north, like in Canada, you don't get to see it that often. In my entire life, I've only seen it 3 times. Once was very spectacular. We watched it for like 4 hours. It was unbelievable. It was just spectacular. I can still conjure it up. It's definitely an experience to be had in life. But this is the kind of natural light experience that we have lost in the modern day. That we've lost our connection to the natural lights around us, to the stars, the Milky Way, the fireflies, fire, campfires. I know it's a rich tradition of camping here, which I really think is beautiful. It's very healthy. You sit around a campfire, you look at the stars. It's part of our tradition, it's part of our humanity. To connect to these natural lights, which if you're a believer, then God has created them. If you're not a believer, then there is something higher that has created them. Some greater force that has created these lights, and we've lost these connections to this greater force. And I think it's time to look at light again from this perspective, because today we only think of light in terms of images. And I just showed you an image. In fact, here I am pontificating about how we should be connecting to light, and I'm showing it to you through a movie, which is the sad part about human life, right? I'm showing it through an experience that is so natural and can only be experienced physically. Like, this is nothing compared to the real thing. You're in tears when you see the real thing. I mean, you can watch it for hours, It's quite a spectacular thing. So again, bringing that mystical connection to light is really important. Bringing that sensibility to light again in a very different form, because today I think we're just see light in the form of images, and I'll get to that in a second. Thanks to Ibn Al Haitham, actually, a lot of our understanding of images is light based because of Ibn Al Haitham. Now I'm just going to talk very quickly about something he did by watching an eclipse in 1030 in Cairo. What he does is he takes his experimental method and he pushes it to its logical conclusion, which is to have one of the most brilliant, succinct, logically clear, it's one of the clearest texts you will ever read, and it's one of the clearest mathematical demonstrations of why an eclipse appears the way it does. Did I mean to have something here? I can't remember now. Maybe. Oh yeah. Again, I'm showing you through the medium of the image, and now the moving image, which again is the legacy of Ibn Al Haitham, the moving image. I mean, you can go on and on with the number of things that came out of Ibn Al Haytham's ideas. He didn't discover all these things, but it led others to discover all these things because he had set the foundation for it. One of them is the moving image. Of course, I'm able to show this to you because our technology is advanced to the point where I can show you moving images in the theater. But that was the only way to watch eclipses in the olden days without hurting your eye, is you watched it as the light streamed through a tree. And you could see all the little crescents on the ground, millions of them. You see the millions of crescents. The next time there's a solar eclipse, we can try that. I've never done that in my life. But next time there's a solar eclipse, just stand under a tree and don't look at the sky, don't look at the sun, but you look at the reflection on the ground. And you'll see thousands of points of light, and they'll all be crescent-shaped because the sun is slowly covering the moon. And all you see are these crescents. And Ibn Al Haytham, the people had known that for thousands of years. The Chinese had known it since 300 BC, and it actually explained it quite well. But nobody had looked at it mathematically as accurately as Ibn Al Haytham had. And I'm actually quite convinced that he must have had access to a Chinese text, which we have now lost. He doesn't mention it. He's pretty good about mentioning all the texts he reads. I don't know, maybe this Chinese text did not arrive in Cairo, but I would wonder why wouldn't such an important text not come to Cairo. So again, these are academic questions that need to be sorted out. But in the Chinese text, there's an understanding that light goes through a tiny aperture and flips the image. And that's as far as the Chinese were able to take that idea. And then it was Ibn Al Haytham's pinhole camera that changes it into a science, into a mathematics, into a geometry, that then leads to the birth of many things, including the camera. Yeah. Now, if I were to put a pinhole camera in front here, let's suppose I pass the light of the flowers. If I pass the light of the flowers through a hole, a tiny hole, what would happen is this image would project on the back, upside down, with the rose being would be flipped. Purple would be, yeah. Rose would be there. Sun, yeah, now I've got it right. That's what you would see in the pinhole camera. That's what you guys are seeing in the camera, except it's turning it right side up for you again, so you can enjoy the view. Otherwise, that's exactly how cameras work. And Ibn Al Haytham was the first to use his experimental method to actually explain this mathematically, how it happens. So he pushes the Chinese idea forward, he pushes the Greek idea forward, and he pushes the Arabic idea forward, because even Al-Kindi had toyed with the idea earlier. And he pushes all three theories forward to a point where everyone is convinced. And he says to people, try it yourselves. That was the whole point of science. Don't be convinced by me, he says in the book. Try it yourself. And those are the magic words that launched the scientific revolution in the 17th century, 16th century in Europe. Try it yourself. Do not just rely on texts that you have received from people, because likely things are not the way that you are believing it to be. Try it through my method, the experimental method. The controlled experimental method is the only method that will get you to the answer. Now, not all of us can do these controlled experiments on a daily basis, otherwise we would have no lives. But I do want to show you something. I'm not sure if I should do it here. I just don't want to create any reflections. We can put it here. Okay. It's the last of the, and I'll need a little bit of help. So, first of all, if who has the spatula? Yeah, what do we call it? The spoon. Can you come out, Najwa? Okay, you and Habiba are going to figure out with this light, while I set up over there, you just hold this light here. Actually, let's use the softer light so we don't hurt. Yeah, let's use the softer light. Okay, Habiba, Najwa, you're going to hold the light for Habiba, and Habiba's going to look at the flowers through the spoon. Okay, and then you tell me what. Can you point the spoon, Habiba, this way? Look at the flowers. Can you see the flowers in the spoon? Look at the flower in the spoon. Can you see this one? It's not showing. Can you see the orange?
Yeah, the orange one.
Okay. And then turn it around. Turn the spoon around. What happens then?
Now we can see.
Turn it around now, completely. The other side. And now, what do you see?
Also, I can see them.
Okay, is it right side up or upside down?
Oh no, it's upside down.
Okay, so that side's upside down. If you turn it around, that side is?
No, that's correct.
That's the correct side, yeah. So light does these really funny things on concave surfaces. On curved surfaces, light will bounce off and actually flip the image upside down, or it'll flip it this way, or it'll flip it that way. All these mathematics are in book 7 of the optics. And some of the mathematics is still being worked out, believe it or not. To this day, there are people still studying, poring over the mathematics of how these curved surfaces send light into different directions. Yeah. So that was cute, right? Yes, done.
Thank you.
And thank you, Habiba. She's so cute. All right. And then, of course, I wanted to show one of my favorite demonstrations, but I don't want to. I have to do it like this. Okay. Okay. I'm going to stand here just to block the light so that you don't get a direct hit. Okay, so I'm going to again show, can you guys see the ray here
Yeah.
on my right?
Yeah.
You do see it? And then you see the second ray coming out here? That ray is a bit weak. Yeah, okay.
Maybe that you're blocking it.
Yeah, okay, that's going to be a tough one to do without, I can't, and I don't want to use the more powerful laser because that's not good. So we will have to skip that one. You can't see the light too. Anyway, what I was trying to show was that light, when it reflects off surfaces, it reflects off in very, very tiny angles. So the angle that you come in at is exactly the angle that will reflect off. And these are the kinds of experiments that Ibn Al Haitham did over months and months and years even, probably spent 20 years compiling this book. It's really a love of what he was, it's really his passion of what he was doing, but it ultimately leads to this. And it ultimately, and very, very quickly, I'll just spend another 2 minutes because I don't want to spend too much time, that today, all we do is we paint with with light. Light is now our is our brush, is our paintbrush. All these photographs that we take, everything we do, we've sort of, again, lost touch with the mechanical way of painting. And we're just painting with light now. So we take pictures and we turn them into digital images, and then we turn those digital images into truth. We can explore planets with light. It's just an image. It took hours and hours and hours for this light to come back from Pluto, but it finally got back, and it gave us a view of Pluto. Yeah. We get into the lives of the Rohingya refugees through photography of a journalist capturing the emotions. Light, again, light particles. Or we watch spectacular movies, which would be impossible without the magic of light. And we're all now image makers. And now the world picture is being formed by this network of images. Yeah, we construct truth from it, and we construct all that. Again, this opens up a whole new, and already the whole visual culture studies is big now in academia. Everybody loves to talk about the image, and it's thanks to Ibn Al Haitham, and the power of the image in our world has taken over. Thanks to his understanding of light, thanks to his understanding of the camera obscura, which was that box with the pinhole, flipping, which is still the modern day camera, still turning images upside down. And from him we get the study of rainbows 200 years later by Kamal ad-Din Farsi. It's the first mathematical study of the rainbow. We get the study of the rainbow from a German monk, Dietrich of Freiburg, because of Ibn Al Haitham. And both of them used a model for the first time, what we call a model in science, which is to represent reality by building something. They built a raindrop. It was yay big, out of glass. They filled it with water, and they said, this is the raindrop. And from that, I'm going to now diffract the light into its different colors. Kamal ad-Din Farsi comes to the conclusion that light is not a separate category of light, it's integral to light. It is part of light. Color is part of light. And that sets the stage for Newton, some 300 years later. It opens up a whole new world of light in the Christian world, in France, in Italy, in France, in England, Germany with the Gothic architecture. It opens up a whole new world for artists in the Renaissance. Why not? So, as you can tell by the excitement of the music, we have entered a new era. They were really sure that it entered a new era in science, math, art, everything. And what happens initially is this reverence of the Arabs, of the Arabic science, of Islam, which gradually wanes over time as the true discovery of science happens. Quotation marks, true. There's an effort by the Italians, by the French, by the Germans to move away from Arabic texts and to create their own science now. It's time to now show the world that European science is at the front of humankind and human ingenuity. And so that music reflects that. You know, that's the first overture from an opera, the world's first opera, Orfeo. And that's the overture to it. We'll hear it one more time, and you can hear the excitement of the new world. So we're in a new world now, a new way of seeing, a new way of painting, a new way of thinking, a new divine order, a new moral order. That's what these artists and thinkers are writing about now. It's like, you know, it's time now to show the world what we can do. And perspective is born. Of course, it was born a long time ago, but it becomes something very special in Italy. It gives birth to some of the most beautiful paintings of the human heritage. Now, these guys, the early artists, studied Ibn Al Haitham very closely, very, very, very closely. Without Ibn Al Haytham's work at their side, they had very little guidance for what light rays were doing and how light rays could be captured and put onto a two-dimensional surface to make it look three-dimensional. And right till the 17th century, Johannes Vermeer. I didn't expect that one. That's Orfeo still. It's fine. It's okay. Well, let her sing. So, as you can see, we also have a new sound now. This had never been heard before. This style of singing. It's the first operatic piece. But this is much earlier than 1665. By 1665, we would have heard something like, I think we had Vivaldi or something. You would have heard sounds like this. Or there was something else for this one. Or maybe we didn't even have anything for this one. Yeah, I don't think we did. No worries, Dina. This is the famous girl with the pearl earring, which I'm sure you might have seen the movie. It's Vermeer's most famous painting. But look at the luminosity. She's sitting in front of a window, and the light on her face, and the way everything just lights up, has made many optics specialists suspicious. Like, how could he have gotten it so right? How could he have gotten it so right? Was he using some kind of a pinhole camera? Was he using some kind of a instrument that captured light in a way that then he could just paint on top of it? So those theories are becoming now very, very popular. There's a professor at the University of Texas who is convinced that Vermeer used optical instruments to paint. Now, how he did that, when he did that, is still a mystery. Maybe he kept it a total secret even, because his livelihood was dependent on his ability to produce light with such extraordinary luminosity through paint, just simply by painting. So he may have kept that method a secret. It'll take some time to figure out whether these artists were used, but it's a known fact that many other Renaissance artists, and later artists as well, 17th century artists, were using some kind of optical instruments and mirrors and refractors and reflectors to produce the art that they produced. It's, according to what historians say, for almost 500 years, Islam lost the tradition of optics. Oddly, after a book like Ibn Al Haytham's Kitab al-Manadir, what happened? Why was nobody interested in the Muslim world? So I think that's humbug. It's just that we haven't found the interest yet. We haven't found the students of Ibn Al Haytham writing. We haven't found where they worked, which school they worked in, who was patronizing, who was their patron, who was giving them money to do these experiments. We don't know. We know nothing about what happened after Ibn Al Haytham. The Fatimid Empire for which he worked collapsed soon after he passed away. Things moved on. We don't know what happened, but about 500 years afterwards, we get somebody like Taqi al-Din rekindling that interest in optics. In Istanbul. So if you were to look at the peaks of Islamic optics, there's Al-Kindi, kind of a low peak in optics. Then you get Ibn Sal, who does these incredible experiments with lenses. Then Ibn Al-Haytham builds on all of these guys and produces his masterpiece. Then you get a huge gap till Al-Farisi, about 300 years in Iran. He has a breakthrough in explaining the rainbow, which I showed you earlier. He uses the rainbow model. And then you get Taqi al-Din almost 500 years after Ibn al-Haytham. That's not what happened in the West. In the West, the book became it was on everybody's desk. And it was read thoroughly. And it led to so many new avenues of thought. Now, what happened is the question. I feel like there are major gaps in our historical understanding of what happened between these periods. But another major reason is that patronage was probably lost during this period. And also, in the Muslim world, institutions were not as strong as in Europe. Institutions of science and institutions of places where you could do an experiment for 30, 40, 60, 80 years. Those kinds of spaces were slowly beginning to disappear after Ibn al-Haytham. There were less and less stable institutions. Is that the reason why optics never took off in Islam? Again, these are questions for academics to figure out. But in the West, certainly optics took off, and you have a brilliant tradition of optics to this day in the writings of Newton, who was famous for saying, "I stand on the shoulders of giants," who also took light in a very different direction. But today, we do live in the age of optics, and it's largely because of Ibn al-Haytham's breakthrough of the importance of light in human sight, and why we need light to see, and how we can manipulate light. So today we can manipulate light beautifully, right? We can do all kinds of things with presentation, and I also invite you to ask questions if you have any. So that was a bit of a journey of light through the Muslim world, and at the end, through the European world, partly because of Ibn al-Haytham's influence in that part of the world. Many of Ibn al-Haytham's books never reached Europe, by the way. Kitab al-Manazil reached there by the 13th century. By the 13th century, it was already translated into Latin. And it was known very, very well in Europe. But other books did not reach there. The pinhole camera book didn't reach there. The eclipse book didn't reach Europe, at least none that we know of. Any questions? I know it's been a lot of information and but I hope it was fun. It was a nice way for me to share my passion for this topic with you, and I hope that you will continue thinking about it and sharing this with your families, especially the youngsters, the next generation of scientists who will change the world, obviously, and they will, no doubt. So I hope this was inspiring for them as well. So yes, Hasan. This was a planted question, by the way. No, I'm just kidding. Everyone's silent. Hasan will ask.
I was just intrigued by the fact you mentioned during your presentation that colors are part of light.
Yeah.
And they're integral to light, and as opposed to being some subject which is external to light. So my question is more about understanding that fact. If the colors are integral to light, so today in astronomy, for example, I'll give example of planets. If the light hits Earth, different colors reflect, and when the light hits Mars,
yes,
different color reflects.
Right.
So if the source has the same colors in its ray, then why is it reflecting differently? Number one.
Okay.
Number two, I'm coming from an angle, just to give you a perspective, is that I'm coming from an angle saying that colors are there, light just reveals them.
Colors are there. Okay, so what you just described was precisely the battle between the Greeks, the Arabs, even the Chinese, as I said, had thought about all of this very carefully. Where do colors come from? It's an age-old question. And for Haytham, much like the Greeks, he said that color always goes with light, but they're distinct things. They're totally distinct things. You can actually separate them. So you can take a color beam and a light beam, and but they travel along the same path. They do exactly the same things. They reflect exactly the same way. They curve around exactly the same way. They reflect off curved surfaces exactly the same way. Identical, but distinct. So that was Haytham's idea. Eventually, Newton says no. By the time we get to Newton, he's like, no, it's the same thing. It's the same phenomenon. Light is color. In fact, we cannot get color without light. So the reason I see brown here and blue here is because of the pigment in the shirt here absorbs everything except blue and flicks it back at me. Here, everything gets absorbed except brown and flicks it back at me. That's Newton's explanation. Now, Taqi al-Din, the guy who did the beautiful rainbow model, came very close to the modern understanding. He's like, no, color and light are the same thing, guys. There's no point in saying that they behave exactly the same way, but they're distinctly different. For some reason, Haytham couldn't make that leap. I still don't understand why. If something behaves exactly like something else, chances are they're the same things. But I don't know why Ibn Al Haitham doesn't do it. He's a genius, but he doesn't do it. But there must have been a good reason why he doesn't do it, and it possibly is because he still couldn't figure out how different things could give off different colors. That was not available to him, and I can understand him not feeling comfortable saying that they're exactly the same thing, because there was no understanding of absorption, that this light could actually get in and then only flick whatever color that it needed to flick. That concept still hadn't existed. It would take us another 500 years till Newton comes along to help us understand that. I don't know if that makes sense. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Kind of. I mean, we can talk about it later. This could go on, but you precisely got at the heart of the debate that was going on during Ibn Al Haytham's time. Exactly that debate. Is it the same thing or is it not the same thing? And that was something he decided that it's not the same thing, but identical in how it behaves. So if I were to, I mean, you get it. If I were to show you that light traveling to you behaves in exactly the same way as the color traveling to you for him. He couldn't make the leap of, I think the scientist in him prevented him from saying, I'm not going to say anything until we know more. I think that I can hear him totally saying that. I'm not going to go there until we know more. And it's going to be the next scientist who does that.
Thank you so much for this fascinating, I think, immersion into this world of science and your passions. I think that was incredible with music and all the experiments. So I'm sure it's a lot of work to prepare all of that. So,
Poor Shahina has been doing this with me for 15 years. I've driven her to the point of madness. Where is she?
Yeah, she probably is preparing, helping with something else.
Yeah, so thanks to her.
Yeah,
a lot of this.
thank you so much. And my question is building on, like, looking at the big picture, like you're saying that this notion of light and the science of light, something that is underestimated and that comes from the Arab world. So what other topics?
A part of it comes from the Arab world. Because there are many traditions that
right.
struggled with light as well and thought about light as well,
Yeah,
like
right.
the Greek, the Chinese.
So what are other parts of the science that you see as so prominent and so that come from this part of the world but still are not appreciated enough? And I'm sure there are a lot, but can you just shed a light on that?
Absolutely. So almost any domain, chemistry, mathematics, when we talk about optics, astronomy, pick any major domain, major chunks of human knowledge, there is a connection to the Muslim world, a scientist from the Muslim world. Now, that doesn't mean that the scientist was Muslim. The scientist could have been Christian, Jewish, any faith, any ethnicity, any culture, because they all worked in the same space. That Marshall Hodgson, what he calls that Afro-Eurasian ecumene, you could see it in Baghdad, you could see it in Cairo, you could see it in Damascus. These were cosmopolitan hotspots. They were diverse. So you had many people from all over, but they didn't talk about it in the academic world, what was going on in the Middle East. They simply wanted to know, how did the Greek texts reach Europe? That's all they wanted to know. That's all I was taught for years and years and years and years. All I was taught was in the history of science, because I've always been interested in history of science. So whenever I asked my teacher, they would say, well, the Greeks did this, and then the Europeans did this. And what happened in between is not even worth studying, I was told by a professor. Not even worth studying. Don't waste your time, were her words. Just look at what happened from here to here, and that's it. Don't look at this. It's pointless. You know, people have studied it, and there's nothing there. That's literally what she said to me.
Astrolab is something like that.
Sorry?
Astrolab.
Astrolab is a Greek instrument that was taken to a very new level of accuracy by the Muslims, by the Arabic science, by Arabic. So again, the term Muslims, Arabic, Islamic, you have to be careful and not get all of those nuances mixed up, all the diversity mixed up. When you say Arabic, when I say Arabic, I mean science that was written in the Arabic language. But it could have been done by Arabs, it could have been done by Persians, it could have been done by Chinese, it could have been done by Europeans even, Caucasians from the Caucasus, that's what I mean. From the Caucasus, from Bulgaria, Hungary, Istanbul. I mean, it was such a diverse cosmopolitan space. You had Armenian scientists, you had Byzantine scientists, you had Coptic scientists, but they're writing in Arabic. They're all writing in Arabic, which is why we call it Arabic science. Yeah? Now, when you say Islamic science, people get very touchy about it. Is there such a thing as Islamic science? Science that is truly Islamic? Well, there are philosophers right now debating that. There are journalists, there are authors, writers, academics struggling with the term Islamic. What do we mean by Islamic science? Is there an Islamic science? I am in the I'm in the camp that says, yes, there is an Islamic science. It needs to be developed still. I think there needs to be an ethical underpinning to science. When we do science, I as a Muslim should have an ethical underpinning when I do science. That is what I call Islamic science. Because I as a Muslim would have an ethical Islamic underpinning when I do science. For example, when I'm doing genetic cloning or whatever. I need to have an Islamic ethics behind that. Me, personally, as a Muslim. Christians need to have a Christian ethic. Buddhists need to have a Buddhist ethic. So it then becomes Buddhist science, it then becomes Christian science, it then becomes Islamic science. But we never talk about Buddhist science and Christian science. Who ever talks about Christian science? You know, it sounds fundamentalist and scary, actually. So we never talk about it. So why talk about Islamic science? I don't know. So again, as a Muslim, I wonder, why talk about Islamic science? Or maybe, but I do believe there is an Islamic science that needs to develop still through a discourse, through a discussion with many other people. It needs to happen, I feel, because we cannot just do science blindly without an ethical system, because then it can go in the wrong direction, and it does go in the wrong direction often. Often does go in the wrong direction. There are certain directions we don't want to take knowledge in, and that becomes an ethical Islamic principle for me. And at that point, I'm willing to say that's Islamic science. But that doesn't mean that only Muslims do that. All other religions can do that as well. And maybe one day we will speak of Christian science and Islamic science. But right now, I'm most comfortable saying Arabic science, because for me, it's science written in the Arabic language by many, many, many different types of people. Men, women, also. We forget the women in the story. We hardly know about the women scientists in Islam or in the Islamic civilization. I cannot even name one. And I've been reading this stuff for 30 years, 25 years I've been reading this. I've come across just names like, you might have come across one like Zainab, and I'm like, okay, what did Zainab do? Nobody knows what Zainab did. All you know is she did math. What did Zainab do? Let's find out what Zainab did. I'm sure we can find out what Zainab did. You know?
Could you say a word or two about the large number of manuscripts? The large number of manuscripts that are yet to be explored, and the shortage of people who can do this.
Yeah. So one of my favorite pastimes is, how many Arabic scientific manuscripts are there in the whole wide world? Sometimes I figure there's about 1 million. And sometimes I think, okay, maybe it's closer to 100,000 that are actually trustworthy, because when you copy, you make mistakes. So you can make copies. Before the printing press, everything was done by hand. Everything, even Haytham's books were written by hand right until the 17th century. In fact, one of the first books to be printed was Ibn Al Haytham's Optics in Italy, in Germany, and then sent to Italy, because there was a huge demand for that book. So somebody figured, hey, these Italians want this book, let's make money, let's print it for them. And one of the first printing presses published Ibn Al Haytham's books. I mean, it's amazing. 16th century Germany is printing books by an Arab 1,000 years earlier. You would think that science had progressed by now, and why would they want to turn to Ibn Al Haytham? It's so late in the game, or you would think that. And yet there's a huge demand for Ibn Al Haytham's Optics. It's a beautiful book. We don't have a single copy of it in UAE or in the Gulf region. Like, where would I go to get a book like that in the Gulf region? I don't know. I don't even know. We don't have a copy of it. There are thousands of copies of it in Europe. And there's at least I would say 5 copies of it in my city, in Toronto. I can go to any library at the University of Toronto, look up Ibn Al Haytham, and get at least 10 books written by him. Here I had a hard time finding one book by him. We need to redress this balance, right? We need to figure out what's going on. Why are we not interested in this heritage? This is a remarkable heritage, remarkable heritage. And if we're going to forget it, the world will forget it. I really feel proud about this heritage. I really do, because it is part of our human history, and we cannot lose it. So again, I turn to my friends Arwa and Maria and say, can we do something about this? Can we start a library that just, the saddest thing happened in the Syrian war. One of the saddest things in the Syrian war was the destruction of the Aleppo library, which held 100,000 manuscripts. Ibn Al Haytham probably was in there somewhere. Whether these books were saved or not, I don't know. In Bosnia, they did a really good job during the war. People lined up for like hundreds of meters in the cold, passing books to each other. There's a beautiful film about this, how they saved the library in Sarajevo, which had all these ancient manuscripts. They stood in the streets, all of them, shoulder to shoulder in the cold, passed the books so that they could be saved before the library burnt down. Aleppo was bombed to the ground. The library still exists. Yeah, we don't even know if the library is still there. Cairo, I've never seen a sadder library in my life when I was in Cairo. Yet the treasures they have, oh my goodness. I was literally in tears the first time I went there. Literally in tears. I was like, I can't believe you guys have this book here. And they're like, yeah, we have 100,000 books, 100,000 treatises in Cairo, in a building that's about to collapse any day. Like you feel like, my God, this building, if I just move a little bit, it's gonna fall. That's how bad that building is. and I'm always worried that library will burn down because the risk of fire is so high in a library. So we need institutions that feel proud of this heritage, can showcase this heritage, and in the region now there's an opportunity to say to the regional texts, like, 'cause there's so many texts in the region. They're hiding somewhere. We just don't know where they are, but they're out there. Bringing them all under one roof and showcasing this incredible heritage is worth doing, I think, in the region, because I think we can do it. If anybody can do it, we can do it in Dubai. I feel that. I really feel that. So I have a lot of hope that we can do it here in the UAE. So what was I? Yeah, the number of manuscripts, my gut feeling is 500,000 now. 500,000 manuscripts, of which only 1,000 have been studied carefully. Yeah. So we still don't know. We hardly know anything about Arabic science. Only the books that were important historically, the ones that we know have influenced modern science, are the ones that are being studied right now. We haven't looked at anything else that has not made an impact on the modern world. So we've lost a lot of theories as well. So for example, the Chinese theory of vision, predominantly lost now because we don't have those original manuscripts. We don't know what ancient China knew about vision. And yet I'm sure they knew a lot. We've lost that tradition now. We can't lose these traditions because they're really important for us to understand how the world works, how the world functions, this history of science. Oh, by the way, I love what Marshall Hodgson says. He says the straight line from Greece to Europe is an optical illusion. So, throw it out, he says. Let's reclaim this heritage. We live in a country that's so fortunate. We are so fortunate. And there are countries right now that have these books, but no place to put them. No safe place to keep them. No safe place to guard them. So before something happens, let's get these things and protect them. Any other questions? We'll take one more and then we can, I think, end because we have to leave very, very soon, I think.
Yeah, we can
Theater.
take one more,
Okay.
and then if anybody else has any more questions of they want to have some set discussions with you on these interviews.
Sure. I'll be outside. So one more question, if you have any. Yes.
Thank you, that was really inspiring. I wanted to ask about the beginning. You said why Ibn Haytham was on that book. Is it a long topic?
Well, let me tell you very quickly.
Complicated one.
It's a bit complicated. By that time, the importance of the image had established itself. So in order for you to prove something, you had to show me an image of it. In order for me to believe that the moon has craters, show me an image of it. So the book is filled with images of the moon. Whether they're accurate or not is up for discussion. But the fact that you put it on paper and drew it in a three-dimensional way for me to understand it proves to me that you have done this. You've seen this with your own eyes, which now becomes proof. So who is the master of proof of image? The authority on image, Haytham, is the authority on the image and how images form. Let me put him on the front cover, make sure that everybody knows this book is based on solid foundation. It's got Ibn Al Haitham and it's got Galileo, the inventor, the so-called inventor of the telescope. He's not the first person to peer into the telescope. There were a couple of scientists before him who peered into the telescope in Europe. It's not outside Europe. Nobody looked at the telescope. Anybody believe that? I find that so weird that nobody took a lens and just did that.
It's just like all UFO incidents happen in the US.
Yeah, yeah, right. I cannot believe that people who were studying lenses day in, day out, throughout their lives, writing manuscript, writing treatises, thousands and thousands and thousands of pages, like Ibn Sal, would not have lifted a lens, gone to his window, and done something to see that, oh, it magnifies, my goodness. It magnified the moon. I can now see the craters. Maybe he did it and didn't think anything of it. So I think many people have done that. Problem was, what did we say earlier? You don't know that this is a sunflower until you've learned it is a sunflower. The human brain doesn't see things unless it has an experience of it. So you can look at something and interpret it completely the wrong way because your brain doesn't make sense. So going back to the Galileo example, somebody did do this in England almost 50 years before Galileo did that. And he writes, oh, I looked through the telescope at the moon today. Very bright, circular, with very strange spots on it. That's it. And he stops. He stops right there. Khalas, he closes the book. And he moves on. Galileo, on the other hand, was trained in art. He was trained in a particular technique called, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Hani, maybe you can help me there. Chiaroscuro? Chiaroscuro. Chiaroscuro? Scuro. Chiaroscuro. Chiaroscuro. Italian word for light and how it behaves under certain conditions. So how shadow and light work together to produce three-dimensionality. When he looked at the moon, because he had had this lifelong training to study this particular form of art, and he was a master at it, I think, he looked at it, immediately saw craters. It's like, there's holes on the moon. My goodness. The whole book starts. Depends who looks. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.
I think the first thing I want to say.
Sorry.
It's all right. Yeah, so the first thing I want to say is I don't think our Insta story feed has ever been this exciting to look at with a light show. So thank you so much. Just putting everything into the context of our daily lives and bringing spirituality into it and everything else was just so enlightening, for lack of better words. So thank you so much, everybody. If there's anything you want to speak to Amin about, I'm sure he wouldn't mind just lingering a bit longer just outside and answer any questions you might have. Thank you, Shahina. Thank you, everybody.